Welcome, low-ego action heroes. I'm Debbie Levitt from Delta CX. We are a full-service CX and UX consultancy, and this is my Axure 10 Core Skills course. I've been using Axure since February 2011, and I've been teaching it for many, many years, and in fact, I've been one of Axure's recommended trainers since 2014. This course is designed to take you from super Axure newbie or Axure afraid all the way through to confident intermediate. So if you've landed on this one video, there are many, many others. Please check our Axure lessons playlist for a lot more videos about using Axure. The Delta CX YouTube channel has over 500 videos on it as of when I'm recording this in December 2021, and I hope you'll subscribe and join in some of our live streams. I'm live usually 3 or 4 times a week with teaching UX research and design, talking about CX, helping people get into the profession, helping leaders and managers, and of course, don't forget Tuesday, office hours, Ask Me Anything. So subscribe and hang out here. So thanks for being here. Please subscribe and let's jump into that next Axure lesson.
For our adaptive views lesson, I'm going to go back to this copy of my Beach Cabanas page that I've named Adaptive Views. And there's a few things to know about adaptive views in Axure. One of them is that Axure does not do responsive mobile design or any type of responsive design. People think that adaptive views means that Axure is going to reflow things based on different sizes, and that's just not the case. Axure works completely in fixed widths, which means you're working in breakpoints. Now, people feel like, oh, that's old-fashioned. I was doing that in 2012. Where's my fully responsive mobile design? Again, the idea is that you are emulating responsive design by doing adaptive design with breakpoints. So for example, your desktop might be 1200, your tablet is 768, and your phone is 375. That also means that if you go to test this on the actual devices, you have to make sure that the widths match up. If you put a 375 wide mobile design on a much larger or much smaller phone screen, you're going to see it just doesn't fit. It's too large or too small. Axure is not reflowing for the size of device you have. So that means plan ahead. If you are testing on a Samsung Galaxy S9, if you are testing on an iPhone 2 million, whatever number they're up to, make sure you've got the dimensions for that and make sure that you have built for that and you're testing on that, because otherwise you're going to find the sizes don't match up. And people go, well, I think Axure should do complete responsive design. And I say, look, Axure is a very good robot. It does what you tell it to do. If this page is now 2 inches wider, what does Axure do? Should this picture be wider? Should this text be reflowed differently? Should it be centered instead of left justified? Should the font size change? There are so many things that we do when we are doing our mobile or responsive design. Axure just can't know, especially when we get to the part where we turn this whole thing into a hamburger menu. Axure just can't know that. So I don't expect them to do real responsive design. I'm okay with adaptive design being a representation of what this might look like at different mobile breakpoints. So that being said, let's learn adaptive views together. The first thing we have to do is we have to define our adaptive views. Now you can see right here at the page level there is a button that says Add Adaptive Views. I think it also lives in Style. Here you go. So I can say Add Adaptive Views. Now, Axure assumes that whatever page you've started building here is your base. And that means that this is whatever is your first. If you claim to be mobile first, that means you are building for phone first, and then maybe tablet, and then maybe desktop. I am definitely not mobile first. I am mobile concurrently, in that we also have to think about mobile when we're thinking about desktop. But typically I'm building my desktop version first. I'm often usability testing that first, and then once that's looking good, I try to make an appropriate mobile version of that. I'm not sure mobile first sounds cool, but I'm always always worried about trying to build the smaller version, which is sometimes a subset of something, before we build a larger version, which is sometimes a full set of something. So I am definitely desktop first. With mobile in mind, and mobile will come. So now I need to add some other views. Now I can give it a name, and I can give it whatever width and height I want, or Axure has some presets for us. So if we know that we want an iPad in portrait, then I can call this portrait iPad. And so does this inherit? And we'll talk about inheriting in a moment. And you can see this gives it a little hierarchic relationship. This means anything we design in our base is going to show up in the iPad unless we force Axure and tell it do not do that. But by default, anything we design in the base is inherited into the iPad. We can also create another breakpoint. And again, I can use a preset, or I can make my own width. So I could say Samsung Galaxy S9 and some of these other things. And remember, you don't just want to design for the largest phone out there, because there are certainly still smaller phones out there. I do have an S9 I use as a backup and as a hotspot here in the home office. So yes, people have S9s. My friend, who I won't name, still uses his S4. Those people are out there. Okay, they're probably not a large percentage of your world, but you can always check your logs and analytics and see what size things people have. So we can always say, let's design this for iPhone 11, and it will inherit from iPad. Anything I do on iPad shows up on iPhone. So now we've defined these styles, and you'll see here they are. These are our adaptive views. We have base, portrait iPad, and iPhone 11. And this is probably a little bit overdone. We can just call this one iPhone 11 Pro. I think that's good enough. We don't need these very long names. And so that would be our adaptive views. Now in Axure, let's say I open up another page we made earlier, dynamic panels. Notice they're not there. So I would have to add them. I would have to say, yeah, you know what? This page also gets adaptive views, and it gets the same set I've already defined. This is strange. In earlier versions of Axure, once you made adaptive views, they were automatically available across pages. But it looks like for these later versions of Axure, they're assuming in some cases people have different sets of adaptive views. So I'm going to remove them here, but let's continue working on this page. So we have our adaptive views. So this is our base, which I was imagining was a desktop site that was about, remember we had a weird number, 1033 wide. Don't do that. That was just a random thing I made. I made it at the time because that was the width of my screen. That was where this ended. And now portrait iPad, notice Axure uses that kind of artboardy look to say, hey, anything in the gray is coloring outside the lines. This is the width of an iPad, and you're going to need to fit in it. On older versions of Axure, this didn't have an artboardy look. This just had a global guide, so it had like a magenta line, same type of thing. And this is my phone. Axure says, yep, don't forget, your phone is a bacon strip. Anything outside this line might not be seen. And also notice the dotted lines down here. These are to give you an idea also about the fold on a mobile device. So on an iPhone 11, which is on the long side, this is what people would be able to see before they scroll. Remember, hypothetically, I didn't do the math on this, but this usually would include that top bar. So anything at the very top with the clock and things like that, that's included in this size. And then, of course, the iPad should have a 1068 dotted line, and it doesn't, so that's just weird. And then, of course, our base has no dotted line because we should have a fold, but we didn't tell it how big the screen is. So I usually assume the fold is somewhere 600-ish, assuming people with smaller laptop screens. All right, so now let's take a look at what we need to do to start adjusting this for iPad. And this is going to be a long lesson because there's a lot of different pieces of this to get into place. Now, when it comes to iPad, I tend to keep a mostly desktop experience. I tend to just make things narrower. You can see that snap nicely. I tend to change my margins a little bit. So maybe this is now 20 pixels in. These would be 20 pixels in, so I can quickly grab them and say 20. And then I can reflow this text by changing the size of the box. And Axure will wrap it differently. There we go. And obviously, we're going to have to deal with this header because this header is not only going to change for iPad, but for iPhone, we're going to build a hamburger menu. So we'll change that last. Let's do the rest of the page. This might be able to stay the way it is. This is now off the screen, so this has to come in. And if we're doing 20 pixels, then this has to move over. And we might need to reflow that text because it's wrapping funny. And we're also going to talk about changing font sizes, but for now I'm going to imagine that for our iPad we're reflowing some things, but we're not changing the font sizes. This is no longer centered, so this looks weird. There we go. So this is a little bit more centered, and our fake footer also needs to be brought back in. Now, we can preview this in our browser. You don't have to go grab an iPad just to preview this. Let's do a fresh preview. All right, so this is the base version. How do I know? It says base up here, and I can easily say I want you to pick whatever makes sense for the window, or I want you to pick a specific one. So if I want to make sure to only move through this prototype in the iPad mode, I can choose iPad, and obviously we haven't done the header yet, but this would be the iPad version, and we can check if anything's coloring outside the lines. If we really want, we can always pop out our browser and start messing with the size of the window. So let's do that. And of course, Axure is going to give us that right to left scroll bar because we didn't fix the header yet. But hypothetically on an iPad, it would probably look something like this. Disregard the other page in the background. It would look something like this. And that would be our iPad version. We can check for how we like it and how we feel about that. And we can also take a peek at the phone version, but of course we haven't seen the phone yet. Now the neat thing about when Axure does the phone version is it really says, yeah, this is going to be the size of the phone, and if you're going to scroll, then it's going to look like this. So we definitely need to fix that phone version. So let's go back, and again, we'll do the header later. Let's go back and make a quickie phone version. We might decide that this picture isn't just narrower, it's completely brought in, especially if we want the left to right hero, then it looks like this. Now this font size is going to need to change. We'll talk about that in a moment. For now, let's do a couple of quick adjustments here with the with this font, with these headlines. So let's do an adjustment here and bring this in. This one's going to need to move down. And again, you might have very exacting specifications for where these are and how wide they are. I am just eyeballing this for now just to show you how you would approach this, but you might do, very deliberate sizing and spacing of things that I am not doing right now. Chances are this whole thing is not really going to fly, so we might have to rethink this. Let's say I remove this weird background. Let's see, before I remove the weird background, let's center the picture. Let's see, here we go. And perhaps these become text underneath this. So you can kind of see where I'm going with this. In order to make this phone version, you will be moving things, you will be resizing things, you'll be reflowing them. Yeah, let's remove this. You're gone. Maybe this one gets changed so the picture goes first. You know, just because you had something that was picture second doesn't mean you have to keep it that way for mobile. Maybe I bring this in picture first, and maybe I resize it to line up with the picture above it. So again, all of these design choices are up to you. It's not like there is a right or wrong way to do this. You just have to know that in order to make your adaptive view, you're going to have to mess with pretty much everything on the page so that it will make more sense for what phone looks like. Let's get this in here at our 20 pixels, and of course this has to come in as well. And down here we have this other, so footer on the phone might even be a different size. We might go with a footer that isn't as tall. Maybe the footer is this. Again, I'm making this up. I don't know, but you would have to make these design decisions and run with them. So let's say this looks like this, and we move this down. All right, so let's save and refresh. So again, we still haven't done this header, and we have to fix the font. But if I were to scroll, okay, so obviously I didn't do a good job centering things, but you can see how this would now be a mobile responsive version. Well, not mobile responsive, fake mobile responsive version. Let's talk about fonts a little bit. Now, we probably would want to use, who can say it, global widget styles. Now, global widget styles, in my opinion, need to change. Axure needs to change these to be to have inheriting or some sort of hierarchic relationship, because I'm probably going to want header 2 at the desktop level. I might keep it the same for tablet if it's not too crazy, but then I probably want a phone version. And then I would have to make that separately. So I would have to say duplicate this, P heading 2. Now I call things P when it's the phone. You could call it M for mobile, totally up to you, but I might say, gee, if I'm going to do a heading 2 for the phone, I really only want it to be 18, or maybe you want it to be 24 because it was larger for your desktop site, up to you. But we've got to decide what the heck we're doing here. Now this one says heading 2, though it's got a star, which means I manually made this white. You caught me. So I can say P heading 2. And that's now the way this works. We could even say that, you know, gee, I think for my heading 2s on my phone, I think I want them centered. So that's going to be my style. Now this guy is centered, and now I can drag it around a little bit and make sure it's centered. So again, you can use global widget styles, but you are going to have to, this is an H1, which of course is already bad hierarchy and wrong for accessibility. But again, don't follow my bad heading examples. You're just looking at the technique of using different global widget styles between your different adaptive views. So I can say this is going to be P heading 1, P for phone, and instead of 32, maybe it's 24, and we run with that. And we've created a style, but we haven't applied it. So I'm going to say this is P heading 1. Maybe this moves up a little. You know, again, totally up to you. So let's take a look at an example of inheriting. Now, and let's also use the outline. The outline is going to help us tell this story a little bit. If I go back to the base, and I say, you know what, we need a call to action button here. I'm going to bring out a button. Here it is at 50, 350, our X and Y coordinates, and this is going to be our CTA. Now, if I go to the iPad, which we said inherited, Axure goes, yep, here's your button, and it's at 50, 350. We would have to say, well, actually, you know, for this, we want it over here. Now let's go to phone. For phone, they go, yep, here it is. It's some random set of coordinates I gave you. Here we're going to need to move it again to where we want it. Let's pretend it goes here because we're doing a little bit more of a centered thing on the phone. But again, you can do left justified things on the phone, totally up to you. So that is an example of inheriting. Now, what about inheriting in the other direction? Let's say we decide to add a cute little icon or dog picture or something. Somewhere. I don't think Font Awesome has dogs, do they? No, it's sad. But they do have people. Let's imagine for some reason we're adding an icon of a user in a circle. Now, if I come over here and I add user in a circle, it's over here on the phone. It is not on the iPad, and it's not on the base. That's because inheriting goes in one direction. You are inheriting from your base down if you set up your views to have that inheriting. If you did not set up the views to have that inheriting, then you're going to have to make a lot of separate things work. But if I want something I do at one of these lower hierarchic level things to affect everything, you would click affect all views, and you see they light up, though really the checkbox is easier to see. Now if I come out here and I say user in circle, which of course is just nonsensical here, but just stay with me. Now if I go to iPad, here it is, and I can move it where I want it, and I can go to base, and here it is, and I can move it where I want it. But here's the funny thing, I accidentally still had affect all views checked, which means if I go back to iPad, iPad moved it out where desktop said, and iPhone moved it out where desktop said. So this inheriting gets a little bit funky. Normally I try to always work from the base down, so now I'd have to go into iPad and move it and hope that it didn't move in these other views. Base, okay, good. iPad is done. iPhone, gotta fix you. So be careful of the inheriting. It's cool the way it works, but it's unfortunate that sometimes Axure does things you're not expecting. So always keep checking your work between the three and make sure something unexpected hasn't happened. Now let's also take a look at how things inherit if you erase something. So let's give this icon a name so we can easily find it in our outcome. This is user circle icon. All right, and where is it in our outline? Here we go, user circle icon. So here it is. And if I say, you know what, we need this icon in phone, but we really didn't need it. We need it in phone and tablet, let's pretend, but we don't need it on the desktop. Now, of course, if I delete it from here, Axure's going to go, yup, inherit, and it's just going to be erased from everything, I'm pretty sure. Let's do it. Delete. Is it still on the iPad? No. So, undo. What can we do? How do we teach Axure something lives in some views but not in others? This is where we want to know a little bit more about what Axure calls placed and unplaced. So since we're inheriting, when I say unplace this, you know it's going to be unplaced everywhere else. But let's talk about what placed and unplaced means. Placed means a widget happens to exist in this particular adaptive view. Unplaced means this widget exists in other adaptive views, but not in the one you're looking at right now. So let's take a look at user circle icon. We'll keep an eye on it here in the outline. Now, if I delete it, it's just gone. It's not even in the outline. We erased it. If I say unplace from view, it is still here. Now, Axure makes this text red, which is not going to help anybody who's colorblind, so I apologize. But you can also use the filter here to see. Remember, we had placed and unplaced, and I promised I would tell you what those were. Now is the time. If we want to see everything for this view that exists in other views but isn't here, you can always say, show me everything that is unplaced. So here I'm saying placed or unplaced, so it's showing me, hey, by the way, there's this user circle icon that you could place here, but it's not here. Now, unfortunately, this got inherited. We wanted these in our iPad and our iPhone, but not on the desktop. So we can come over to the outline where we see it. We can context menu click and say place. And you might have to move it around if you haven't already put it where you wanted it. And we can go to iPhone, and iPhone has it placed. If it doesn't, you would context menu click and you would choose place or unplace. So again, a placed widget is shown in the view you're looking at. An unplaced widget is a widget that exists in one or more other views but is not placed here. So if we wanted to add it back here, we would say place, and we might have to move it around, or again, we can have it be unplaced. So the newbie mistake here is to say, oh, I don't want this to be on this particular thing, so I'm just going to delete it. Well, if you delete it, it will delete in any place that is inheriting down. But notice earlier, I went into the iPhone and I deleted that wacky Epcot background that we have behind the Pizzolo's testimonial module. Now, why didn't that erase from everywhere? Because I didn't say affect all views, and there's nothing that inherits from iPhone. So when I erased it here, it technically just became unplaced because it still exists here. Remember, it was this thing. It was BG color panel with the picture of the Epcot spaceship Earth. And here it is in the base. So even though I said delete in iPhone, Axure is smart enough to realize that we really didn't mean to delete it. We just meant to unplace it. Here it is. So I could say place in view. I might have to move it around or resize it, but it is still here. Now, if I were to say affect all views and then delete it, this thing would be toast. So affect all views, delete, that's it. It's gone from the outline. You've deleted it from everywhere. So again, we were able to say delete while we were in the iPhone view, but ultimately we could have just said unplace. It would have had the same effect because nothing inherits from iPhone, so deleting it from there didn't delete it from any other view. There's a couple of other neat things that we can do. Now, I know I still haven't done this header. It's a little bit scary, so we'll get there. Let's talk about lots of other things about adaptive views before we go to the scary part. So let's imagine that this call to action does something different, whether you're in the desktop, the iPad, or the phone. Now, chances are it doesn't. It probably just takes you to a certain page. But let's say, just for example, that this button did different things based on what view you're in. Now, the mistake I see made here is typically, oh, I'm going to have to unplace this and put in a different button. And that button will just be for the iPhone. And then I'm going to write my interaction on it. And then I'll unplace this button and make a different button for iPad. You're overbuilding and you don't want to do that. And there's an easier way to go. Let's jump over to interactions with this button selected, and let's pretend that each of the three are going to go to a different page based on whether you're in the base view, the iPad view, or the iPhone view. You'd probably never build that, but just to learn the technique, let's take a look. All right, so when people click or tap, sorry, not double click, when people click or tap, let's say we're going to open a link and we're going to go to page 1. But maybe we only want that to happen if they're looking at the phone. This is where we're going to have our conditions help us out. If adaptive view is phone. So the key things you're going to do here are either if the adaptive view is a certain thing, or if the adaptive view is not a certain thing. So for example, if you have certain things that happen in iPad and iPhone, but not in the base because you've done something different for your mobile experience, then you would want if adaptive view does not equal base. And that would help you narrow that down. So let's say only if this is the phone should we go to page 1. And I can do a quick copy paste and make 2 more of these. And let's say this one is if tablet. So if this is the iPad, then instead of going to page 1, let's pretend we're going to go to dynamic panels page. And then this one, if they're looking at the base, then we want this button to take people to drop list page. So as you can see here, it is definitely easier in Axure to create a single thing like the button that can do different things based on whichever view you happen to be on. And Axure will know this from the preview that you're in, either because you have deliberately selected which view you're in, or you've said adaptive. So what does adaptive do? Adaptive watches for you to resize your page, and then it gives you whatever is the size that makes sense for the browser area you've created. So here I flipped to tablet. Once I get under 768, it assumes I want phone, and it's just going to keep making phone smaller. But notice that it is scaling the phone. It is not rewrapping the text. Eventually the text is just too small to read. It's not rewrapping text that stays at the same size. It is scaling the whole thing, which, you know, is not really responsive design. So here I'm at tablet, and eventually, there I go. I've hit the full desktop version, and it will stay desktop version. So that's how Axure will know. So that means this button does different things based on which one we are in, either because we forced it or because of adaptive. So just remember to make it easy on yourself and just build one thing. Otherwise, you're really going to drive the outline crazy with all of these placed and unplaced widgets that are different in different places. Now, speaking of placed and unplaced widgets that are different in different places, in my opinion, sometimes we have to do that. And let's say, for example, that we've decided this is too much text for mobile. People have shorter attention spans. They don't want to read all this, or we somehow know they don't need to read all this. You might think, you know what, here I am in iPhone, and iPhone doesn't inherit up to the other two. I'll just remove some of this text. Let's just make this text shorter. Now, of course, we'd have to pull everything else up, but guess what? When you change text, Axure assumes you want that text changed everywhere. So that second paragraph is gone from everything else. The text automatically inherits because it's the same widget. And so just like if we change the color of this person, it would change for all of them. It's the same widget. So what we end up having to do here is a little bit of placed and unplaced trickery. So just so we can watch this in the outline, let's call this original paragraph. And that way we can see it. And let's say I copy paste it and we get something that I'll call short paragraph. Okay, now I pasted this here. It won't be anywhere else because phone doesn't inherit up. So this is something that only lives in the phone. And we even know that because back here on iPad, take a look at our outline. Here's short paragraph, and it's in red, which tells us it's unplaced. And again, if you're having trouble with that or you're colorblind, red-green colorblind, and that didn't stand out to you, you can always look at unplaced and see that's unplaced. So that only exists in the phone right now. Now, if we delete this one, it's not going to delete it from everywhere because we don't have effect all checked and we don't have portrait and iPad inheriting. So we can unplace this or delete it and move this one in. And then we could say over here, I only want this much text. And that would be fine because these are now totally different widgets. This is short paragraph, and over on our other views, this is original paragraph. And short paragraph is an unplaced widget. We could place it. Here it is. We would have to do something with it. But if we actually wanted different text blocks that had different text in it, you will have to use different widgets for that. Now, I keep saying that if we wanted a different color here, we'd probably need a different widget. But in reality, once we're styling stuff, we don't need different widgets. We can get away with global or manual styling of something in one view, and it won't show up in another view. And now it might inherit down to the iPhone because these two inherit, but it's not going to inherit up to the base because these don't inherit. Let's place in view. There we go. And that it's for the same reason why choosing a global widget style didn't change it anywhere else unless we said affect all views. So here I could say this one is yellow. Please don't do that. And because things don't inherit up, these other ones don't change. So for a moment, I thought that this was going to change in one place from the other, but in reality, anything that's about that styling or color doesn't necessarily inherit. But always good to test every time you make these changes because this is just weird. Okay, so now we have, this is the short paragraph, and these have the longer paragraph, and that helps you change text. Same would be true if we wanted a different headline for some reason. Maybe we think this headline is different, or we found people on mobile have a different perspective on things. If I change the text here, it's going to change everywhere else. I would instead have to unplace this widget and make a fresh headline here. So that's a little bit of a heads up about when you do want to use different widgets across. Normally I'm doing it when the text is saying something different. So let's talk about one more thing before we look at that header, and that is when you've got components, like for example, this is a component up here. We ultimately, remember our old green button from our earlier lesson? Is this button going to be the same for desktop, tablet, and mobile? This was a component, so this was always going to be 260 wide by 56 high. If you're thinking, oh, no, Deb, that's a pretty big button. I think if it were on phone, I might want it smaller. If you have components that have different adaptive views, you now have to add adaptive views. Now, I believe Axure should just say add adaptive views, but for some weird reason, they call them component views and you have to build them from scratch. To me, this makes no sense, because then these might not match up with my other stuff. So I'm going to need a tablet view, and it doesn't even let me say what size this is, so that's also strange. And I'm going to need that iPhone view, and I can say okay. So let's imagine that in the base it's this. Maybe in tablet, can we get away with changing our color without it inheriting? Wacky button and iPhone yellow button. And again, don't do this. This isn't good design. I'm just using these as examples. Okay, so base is green, tablet, and phone. Now, if we go to drag this component into these views, let's start with the base. Okay, so here it is, and it's green. Now, when I go to iPad, it hasn't changed. Why not? So it says, well, your component view is base. Now I could say, no, my component view is tablet, and you can start manually overriding these things. But is that really the best way to go? Let's go back to our component views and let's edit them. And let's see what happens if we give them different names. What happens if our names perfectly match up? Portrait iPad was what we named this. And this one was iPhone 11 Pro. So now the question is, will Axure match these up if they have perfectly matching names? Let's try dragging it out fresh and see what happens. Yes. So this is where what you named each of your adaptive views is going to be important. And you might say, oh my gosh, Deb, that made no sense. Why doesn't Axure just use the same set of adaptive views? And I say, I know. I think it would be better if they did that. Hopefully by the time you're watching this video, they're doing that. But for whatever reason, components can have a different set of adaptive views, and Axure only connects them if you give them the same names. Now, of course, I still have to move this thing around, but at least now they match up. And if you build different, if you have components, so that's really the short version of what I'm trying to say is if you have components, you do have to build adaptive views of the components. So say, for example, we have this icon. Now, let's take a look. This icon is this. Let's imagine we want smaller icons for our mobile experiences. If we drag this icon out, and this icon is 38 by 38. Over in the iPad, it's 38 by 38, and we just have to move it to where we want it. And in the phone, same thing. So this is not going to have adaptive views unless we create them, which here, sadly, is called component views. And they're not going to match up unless we match up the names. Again, this is not how I would build Axure, but they don't seem to want me to work there. And so things like this exist, which I don't believe are a good UX approach. That is similar, by the way, for dynamic panels. If we were to create something as a dynamic panel, you have to take every state of the panel and you have to give it adaptive views. Let's jump to one of our pages with a dynamic panel. So let's say any of these, really. Let's take Axure's gigantic thing over here. So first of all, we have to tell Axure that this page has adaptive views by going to our style or our style toolbar and saying, we've got adaptive views here. But we haven't done anything here. Axure says, yeah, there's your iPad, there's your iPhone, and this thing is a giant mess. What we have to do is we have to go into each of the states. Let's isolate them. And we have to say, this is what it looks like at base, this is what it looks like as iPad, and this is what it looks like as iPhone. So you would actually have to change every state of every dynamic panel for adaptive views to completely work. Again, let's do a short version of that back on our adaptive views page. Actually, I think for this, what I want to do is let's go back and find that page that had that message panel. Remember we had a message that popped up? That was over here on for me, on special page. I'm going to copy this panel. I'm going to bring it into our adaptive views panel. I'm sorry, adaptive views page. And I'm going to dump it up here. And of course it is pinned to browser, but let's just say it kind of lives here. Now the problem with this is that, and I'm not going to hide it, let's make sure we can just see it so that we can deal with some of the problems of the design of this. Refresh. Here it is in base. Here it is in iPad. You can see that's too wide. Here it is in phone. Of course, that's ridiculous. So we're going to have to deal with this. But because it is a dynamic panel, we're going to have to go into each state and make iPad and iPhone versions. So here in iPad, we found it was a little too wide. So we might say that for iPad, this is going to be not 840 wide, maybe 700 wide. And then we're going to have to move this. And since this whole thing's going to be centered, we probably want to move all of this to the center for iPad. And again, we might know what that number is, or we can snap. So back on the base, it's this. iPad is this. What are we going to show on the iPhone, which is only, what, 360 pixels wide? So that means for the phone, we need to take this and make it, let's say, 300 wide. And we still want that close X thing on it. Or you could make it so that if they tap the whole thing, it now disappears. Totally up to you. You don't have to have the close X thing. If you think it doesn't make sense for mobile, you can always make the whole thing tappable if you believe that that is what would match the user's intentions. Let's see if that works, or if that, if we wanted that to be left justified, oh, we might need it left justified. We might need to move everything around. So let's take a look. Base, okay. iPad, no. It's a little better, but not great. And iPhone. Oop. Oop. I'm moving pieces without all the pieces. Ah, undo, undo, undo. Let's, instead of moving the content, let's move the panel. So really, this panel, we can resize it if we want. So we could resize this to 700. And I would need to go in and shift everything around. So again, let's isolate everything and assume that we are just going to resize everybody. So let's move this to 0, 0. And then for the iPhone, let's assume that the panel itself is going to be resized, which I have to go out of this to do that. So let's assume that this is going to be 300 wide. And now we need to go into it and move things around. You can start to see how responsive mobile design in Axure is doable, and it's worth it, but it's a little bit on the time-consuming side. So here we are in phone, and here's this. So now I can finally refresh here. Here's the phone version. Here's the portrait iPad version. And here's the base version. Now, sometimes people say to me, I don't know, Deb, this seems like way too much work to try to get these mobile adaptive versions done. Why don't I just make 3 separate prototypes or 3 separate sets of wireframes where we have 1 desktop, 1 tablet, and 1 mobile? And I say, you know, I don't think that's going to save you a lot of time. Plus, remember, if you change something here because you make a design change, you might want that design change carried across the other views. So this ultimately probably is a time saver, even though the initial setup or creation of it is a little bit painful. So I hope that helps and gives you some ideas there. Let's look back at that iPad version. Might have to move the phone version again. Nah, okay, it stayed in one place. I never know. I really never know what adaptive views are going to do. I just keep checking. So for the final part of this lesson, let's take a look at what do we do with our header component. Because it's a component, we can double click on it. And now we are editing the component. So here in components, we've got web header. So this is the web header component. And we can say that it has component views. Why this doesn't remember the other component views we just made and why we have to make them again seems like a bug to me. I'm hoping that by the time you are watching this video, Axure has fixed this, but this doesn't seem to make sense to have to keep redefining these and remember to use the same names over and over, otherwise risking that they don't line up well. So I don't understand why this isn't more unified, but it should be. And previous versions of Axure did have this unified, so I really don't get it. So here in Portrait iPad land, notice for some reason in components they're not giving us that 768 boundary. That seems like a bug to me as well. I'm hoping that by the time you're watching this, they fix that. But we know that the iPad is 768, so I'm just going to drag this out there, so I know how wide I have. And let's say that for the iPad, we really want the same navigation for the most part, and we're just going to bring it in and maybe move a few things a little closer together. Maybe the logo gets a little smaller, you know, up to everybody here. But I can quickly grab all these and I can redistribute them, and there we go. So that would be the iPad version. Let's preview. So here's our base, and here's our iPad. No, that is not correct. So let's go back to our page and see what happened. Now, I wonder if Axure, let's close these other pages. I wonder if Axure is so super grumpy that it doesn't seem to have or did I spell something wrong? Did I spell something wrong and now they're not matching up? No, Portrait iPad should match up. I'm going to try removing this component and putting it back now that it has adaptive views, but you know, let's say this out loud. I shouldn't have to do that. So let's see if that works. Web header at 0, 0. Ah, look at that, it works. So again, these seem like bugs to me. I'm hoping that by the time you're seeing this video, these bugs have been fixed, but who knows? So what about the iPhone version? Well, by default, it's showing us the tablet version because we inherited, but we're really going to need to go in here and do something completely different. All right, so now if we want to build the iPhone version, let's make sure we click on this iPhone X Pro, which hopefully matches. Oh, we said iPhone 11 Pro. I'm going to need to fix that, or we're never going to have this stuff line up. And we're probably going to have to remove it and drag it back out because Axure doesn't seem to be waking up to this, but we'll try it. So, portrait, phone. Now, in general, I'm finding that phone versions of things often use the hamburger menu, and more I'm seeing hamburger menus on the bottom, which I think makes a lot of sense. But for the purposes of what we're doing today, I'm going to put the hamburger menu on the top right. You can put your hamburger menu top left. You can put it on the bottom. Totally up to you. And we want to go into our icons and find our hamburger menu, which Font Awesome calls bars. And I'm going to leave this icon big, but again, you could make the icon smaller and put a hotspot over it so that it has a larger tappable area. Totally up to you. So let's save this and baby step test and see what we've got. Okay, so here's iPad. And iPhone didn't get it. So I'm going to have to drag that back out because we changed the component views and Axure didn't get that without us bringing it back out. So this is another great reason why sometimes building in order will really help. You might want to build that whole header first with all of its adaptive views before you start dragging it out to pages, because now I've had to undo this and redo this a couple of times already, and that wasn't fun. So now at least we have this in place. Let's refresh. There it is, and that is a ridiculously large icon, but just stick with me because it's more important to get the technique than to worry about the size of the icon. Now, you might think you want to build this here in your iPhone view of this particular page, but because this is a component and it's going to show up as our header for every page, we want to build it in our components. So let's think about the hamburger menu. How does this work? Typically, people tap on it and some sort of menu slides out from the side. If you want something sliding out from the side, that's very simply show with usually some sort of slide. So let's say that our menu is going to be this gray box, and the height is up to you, whether you're going to do like a full phone screen or a partial phone screen for the menu. Totally up to you. Just for our purposes together, I'm going to make mine 300 wide and 600 high. Yours could go full left to right. You know, again, all up to you and how you want to design it. Just for fun, I'm going to give this menu a color and I'm going to manually do it. And again, up to you. You could do global styles, but this is the one menu for the entire thing. So I'm going to do that. I'm also going to go in and grab our old friend, the X in the corner, because sometimes you do see that once people open the menu, there is some sort of X or some sort of paradigm that tells them they can close it. Sometimes it's another icon of the hamburger menu. Sometimes it's an X. I'm not going to tell you which one you need to do. You need to pick the one that makes the most sense for your designs and your audience. So I will just quickly say, make this a white X, make it small. And again, we can always drop our hotspot on that to make it have a larger tappable area. And that's especially important in mobile because very often in mobile, the rule of thumb is to have at least 44 pixels of tappable area, especially for fingers, and even more, sometimes over 70 if we think someone will use their thumb. So that means that we do want to drag out the hotspot. And we do want to size it up. I like to make sure it's at least 40 in at least one or both directions. So here we go, 45 by 42. That's better. You could go even better and maybe do a 50 by 50 and slide it back a little bit. Now, I've just been throwing stuff on the screen, but this is not in a dynamic panel. This is not going to slide out. This is just sitting there. So that means that I'm going to have to grab these things and put them in a dynamic panel. So I'm going to click on this X. I'm going to shift click on the hotspot and shift click on the blue. It looks like I've only got 2 shapes, so I don't know why Axure didn't allow me to get all of them. The problem is if I just draw a box around this, I'm going to get the hamburger menu behind it. So it looks like I'm going to have to get this and then fix it later. Let's say that just the blue background is our dynamic panel, and let's name it hamburger menu panel. And now let's see if I can grab the, see, we're going to need the hotspot and we're going to need the X. These guys go together. So let me draw a box around them. I'm going to say cut on my keyboard. I'm going to go into the dynamic panel. So let's isolate it. And I can paste, move it to where I want it to go. Okay, so let's say it goes there. So remember, you can create the dynamic panel first and then start putting things in it. You can create this first, but then I kind of had to undo some of my stuff because I had started building and I went a little bit far. So let's imagine that this has a bunch of different things in it. So I'm just going to imagine that maybe over here, this says, let's pretend people are logged in. If they're not logged in, we can say something different. Welcome, Debbie. And of course, we're going to want this to be white text. You would make global widget styles, but just for the speed of this lesson, I'm going to quickly do manual white text. So don't hate me, but use your global styles. And now we might have different things that people can do, which would be different choices here. So maybe we've got this here, and it would also have to be white and probably larger. So again, great for global widget styles. I'm just going super fast, but I would suggest the global widget styling. So maybe this has all of the things that we need in our navigation. So products, services. We don't have to worry about a mouse over state because this is mobile. This is going to be finger taps. So there isn't going to be a hover. There might be a selected, but this isn't a component, and that's a little funky, and I teach you that in the advanced course. So we can imagine that this is some sort of menu, and it's got different things in it. It could have log in, log out, whatever you want to make it do. Let's just build simply so we can just make sure we're cool with the technique of the slide out hamburger menu. So I will select this panel, click the eyeball so that it is hidden by default. And now I have to build here. I need to build a few things. I need to build on that hamburger menu. The problem is, once you've layered a dynamic panel over a hamburger menu in Axure 10, you're in trouble because you can't do your slow click technique to get to that thing. That's where you're going to want to have named it. So I'm going to have to try to find that icon here. Here it is. Shape. I think that's this one. Hamburger icon. Or I'm going to have to move the panel out of the way. This was better in earlier versions of Axure where clicking on a panel like this didn't automatically edit it. You had to double click on a panel to edit it, and that way that meant if I did a single click I could start selecting things under it, but not in this world, unfortunately. So now that I found the shape from here, and again you might want to build a hotspot on top of it so that we can have that be clickable. Now a common mistake that I see here, someone says, oh yeah, I do want that hotspot over this thing because I'm going to make this icon smaller, and they drag out the hotspot and they put the hotspot into place and they go cool. Now wait a minute, let's think about our layering. And I'm going to collapse this for a moment. Here's our hamburger icon. On top of it is the hamburger menu panel. And then on top of it, we put the hotspot to open it. That's not going to work if we have the hamburger menu panel shown and this hotspot is on top of it. That's going to be trouble because that's where you put your close X, and now the close X is not going to work correctly because you have a hotspot on top of it saying open the panel. So let's take a look at this in action. If I say, if someone clicks on this hotspot, open the panel, which is a show with a slide left, because this is going left to right, but you might have to pick something different. So now we can refresh and see how this goes. Tap. There it goes. So it's not lining up perfectly well. We have to move some things around, and this silly pinned thing is on top of it. So clearly we need to hide that by default, or it's going to be all over the place. Hide. Okay, let's try that again. Okay, so why isn't this all the way to the right? Well, look what I built. It is not all the way to the right. And Axure says that's how you built, so clearly what happened was our component wasn't the same width as this screen. It looks like we have a screen that is 375 wide, and we built a component that is 360 wide. So let's go in and let's fix that. Now there is no fixed width here. I can just say, here's my guide. This guide is going to help keep me straight. So let's just grab everybody here and move them over to the 375 neighborhood. Let's see if that's good enough. Open. Okay, that looks a little bit better. The problem is now if I go to click on this, and we can even see it from our trace in our console, if I click here, Axure says, yeah, you're clicking on the hotspot that told me to show the hamburger panel. So be careful of layering here. And this is why we're going to have to remember that either we have to bring this to the front, or we have to say that the hotspot that shows the hamburger menu panel brings the hamburger menu panel to the front. And that way we don't end up with this layering mistake. And the way that we would do that is we would add a bring to front. Bring to front, hamburger menu panel, front. And that way, no matter what we build on top of this panel, accidentally or on purpose, we're not going to end up with a weird layering problem later where other stuff we built is accidentally on top of this panel, and now the panel isn't working right. Now we can go back into the panel. I'm going to isolate it, and we can build it so that this X, it's not the X, it's the hotspot on the X, makes the panel go away. So this would be a show hide, the hamburger menu panel, hide, and slide right. Very often these menus slide out, but if you just want it to disappear, then you don't need the animation. So now let's refresh, click, and click. So now we have a more realistic hamburger menu. Now, some people ask me, what if we want the rest of this screen to be like screened out? We have to do treat as lightbox. You already know treat as lightbox. So we would need to go find the hotspot that's on top of the hamburger menu icon. You could even name it if you want to make sure you can easily find it later. So let's say that we click on the hotspot, and we name it hamburger icon hotspot, just so I can easily find it later. So we could decide to work from that. That would be this guy. Oh, sorry, I named the wrong one. Undo, undo. Okay, so be careful there. So I just made a mistake, but that's why you baby step test things constantly. So this is actually this guy. So hamburger menu hot spot. Okay, so if you want to easily find that one later, give it a name. It's a great way to go, especially when you start having all this layering wildness. And this panel being here and kind of getting in our way is why you might want to use what I showed you earlier, where you can hide the panel and work here and then worry about showing the panel later and maybe even bringing it to the front. So that will help us not get so confused over what am I clicking on right now? Am I clicking on the hotspot? Am I clicking on the panel? You can say get out of here. And that way we've got that. So if we are working on this hotspot, we could say show the hamburger menu panel with, not bring to the front, it's already hopefully doing that, with the treat as light box with some sort of color. There you go. Some people do that, some people don't do that. Another thing you'll see sometimes is sometimes the entire page seems to slide out to the side when this thing gets opened. That's not something we're going to cover in this course. And the reason why it's not covered in this course is because you would have a something in a component affecting something on the page where the component lives. That I consider to be an advanced technique. I know it sounds like that should be easy, but it's really not. Once we're trying to make a component control something outside of the component, it does get a little bit more advanced, and I do teach that in the advanced course. So just know you can do that, but it is not the easiest thing. So we'll save that for later, but at least for now, for the purposes of whatever you're prototyping at that beginner or intermediate level, this is probably good enough even for usability testing and things like that. Chances are you may or may not be testing whether or not people want the screen with the transparency, or if they want the thing to slide, but again, up to you on how you're designing this. So that lesson was really long because adaptive views can be complex and they can be some things that you were not expecting. You can also see that here Axure's asking if you want to override what some of the text on different things say, and you can. Overriding things in components is something that I teach in the advanced course. So if you are getting to that level, you probably want to just take that course. So thanks, and see you in the next video.